Hello, fellow expats, and welcome to French Differently. Today I'm going to take you back in time so we can explore the origins of the French language. Please stay tuned. Our journey begins in 50 BC. Why 50 BC? Because that is the year in which Caesar had finished his conquest of Gaul. So Gaul was now a Roman province. So that means that the language in Gaul was now Latin. Now, we're not talking about the Latin of Cicero or of Caesar himself, but we're rather talking about the Latin of the soldiers and the settlers, which was also called the Vulgar Latin. Yet, Latin it is. No longer the Gaulish language, or whatever it was called at the time, but a variation of the Latin that was spoken at the time. So then you can wonder, how did the Latin language evolve? Even if it's Vulgar Latin, how did it evolve to become French? So, to answer that question, let's fast forward to the year 842 AD, which is about roughly 890 years after Gaul's conquest by Caesar. In 842 AD, two of Charlemagne's grandsons pledged an oath to each other. So collectively, they are called the Oaths of Strasbourg. On this map, you can see that Charlemagne's empire, also known as Francia, was divided into three. The western part is ruled by Charles the Bald, Charles le Chauve. The eastern part by Louis the Germanic, Louis le Germanique. And the middle part by Lothaire. So what happens in Strasbourg? Well, an alliance between those two brothers, Louis on one side, on the east again, Charles in the west, and their alliance is against Lothaire. So what I'm going to read to you is what Louis, the guy from the east, told not Charles himself, but Charles's troops. And he said that in a language that the troops could understand. So I'm going to read you the English translation, and you will find the original text in the description, and you can also find it on Wikipedia. So here we go. For the love of God and Christendom, and our joint salvation, from this day onward, to the best of my knowledge and abilities granted by God, I shall protect my brother Charles by any means possible, as one ought to protect one's brother, insofar as he does the same for me, and I shall never willingly enter into a pact with Lothaire against the interests of my brother Charles. So, what's interesting here, at least interesting for us, is not what Louis said, but it's how he said it. Because he said that in a language that we could name Gallo-Romance, which is no longer Latin, that's for sure, and it's not yet French. If you take a look at what it looks like, no chance you'll understand anything. At least I didn't, or not much. Maybe a word here and there, but that's all. And again, what's interesting here is that this is the first written testimony of what was to become the French language that we have from the Middle Ages. We don't have anything prior to that. About 300 years later, we can see on this map that there were 5 groups of languages spoken in France. Again, I say groups because there was not much unity in the languages at that time. The foremost languages here are Languedoc in the south, in langue d'oil in the north. So you may wonder, what's with this oc and oil? Sounds really strange, doesn't it? Okay, so it comes from the way in the Middle Ages people said yes, because in Latin there is no word for yes. So in the south they said hoc est, indeed it is, and the est pretty much disappeared. So it became hoc or uk. And in the north they tended to say hoc ille est, where the ille is something like itself. Indeed, it is itself, something like that. And that gradually became hoc ille, then oi, and from oi, oui. Our journey in time continues. Now let's move to the 16th century, to 1539, year in which François Ier, Francis I, took an ordinance. What's an ordinance? Like an executive order. In Villers-Cotterêts, where he decided that official documents would no longer be written in Latin, but in French. By the 16th century, the French language had started to take a shape that is understandable by us in the 21st century. But not completely. If you try and read texts from the 16th century, you'll find that it's not that easy. They are difficult to read. Some of them you'll be able to understand, some words, some sentences, but not everything. Let's move forward almost another 100 years. In 1635, Cardinal Richelieu founded the French Academy, l'Académie française. One of the parts that the French Academy plays is government of the language. Can you really govern a language? Good question. But they decide which words go or don't go into the French dictionary. The 17th century is also the century of Molière. And Molière's plays are studied by French teenagers in middle school or even high school. And if you try and read one, you'll find that these plays are quite understandable by 21st century French-speaking people. One thing to point out in the standardization of the language, as it were, is that Louis XIV, Louis XIV, played a big part in it because his government was very centralized. He had a very, very large court with nobles gathering from all over the place, all over the country, to the Versailles Palace, where they were forced to reside pretty much. And that had a really strong contribution to the unity of the language. Another big contribution to the unity of the language was the French Revolution. Because at that time, the government was very centralized and didn't tolerate any regional differences. Later on, in the 19th and even in the 20th century, the fight against regional differences and regional languages continued. Regional languages were all but eradicated. Now, today, in the 21st century, there is a revival of those languages, but at the time, again, they were all but eradicated. As a consequence, in France, everybody speaks the same language. Of course, there are differences in accents, from north to south, east to west, and so on. There are some regional languages, but the standard French is really the same in the whole country. The language that prevailed is the Parisian version of langue d'oil. So that's not to say that today we speak 17th century French, of course. The language continued to evolve, but by and large, that language from the 17th century has the same structure as today's French. And again, as I was saying a few minutes ago, if you want to read a book written in the 17th century and if you speak reasonable French today, you will be able to read it. So, this concludes today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoy my other videos. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do. And don't hesitate to leave me a comment and give me a thumbs up for this video. I'll see you on the next exciting episode of French Differently. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.